And we're gonna wanna set up some lights. So right now we have this distant light, and in particular for this lesson, I want you to use, because we're gonna make lots of little changes all the time. Let's use this render region tool here. Basically just click and drag, more or less around where you're doing, and it's gonna add a little render window on top here. It's gonna cache the geometry, it's gonna apply the lighting and shading. And the nice thing about this is that once it does it the first time, it takes a little bit of spin up the first time, we'll be able to make changes and see them update pretty quickly. See how it's doing that progressive refinement thing here. In particular, let's say, so these are the Pyro defaults. And probably one of the reasons why you're using this lesson is because you don't want your explosions to look like this. And so every time I make a change in here, you'll see it update in there. So I'm just gonna turn the fire off for now by making the intensity of the fire be 0. This will allow us to focus on some things like our general lighting, just on how it plays with the smoke, smoke density and stuff, and then we'll add the fire in later once we're happy with the smoke. So even before we deal with the smoke, let's deal with the lighting itself. So we've got this distant light here, and that was fine when we were just doing this. When we were just using the viewport, the distant light was fine. Turning it off would yield this very flat, difficult to work with things. We mostly just had it for that purpose. Now, I would say, let's just bring that back. Now, let's go with something a little more advanced. In particular, in the lights and cameras area here, click Skylight. And Skylight is actually 2 lights. It's not just one. It is the environment light that they are referring to as the skylight. And it also this sunlight. The sunlight is kind of like a distant light. I'm going to see this a lot. It's a light that is considered to be infinitely far away from our object here, but it is limited to, it still has certain area properties like this, which will cause some smoother shadows and whatnot. So there it is. I don't want this distant light anymore. I'm just going to disable it just in case we need it later for something. Let's move maybe this sunlight over here into where that is. If I look at the transform here, there's already expressions on here. And they are referring to the skylight, actually, that environment light. And you'll notice on the skylight that we have these 3 rotation things here. So let's play with that. We can rotate the light around it, and you can see it updating on there. We could also have our little render window open. That'll take longer than probably need to. We already know for our purposes that we kind of want this to get over to basically where this thing was. So something like maybe move it down a little bit, maybe something like that. Maybe a little bit more, and you can also move this thing here. But I want to make these some kind of nice general numbers, so for those of you playing at home, you can kind of just match it. So that's more or less where that distant light was. Cool. I'm just going to turn this off. It's already, remember, disabled. Cool. So there it is. There's our sunlight, and once again, I'll bring this thing back, put it up, and we'll say that we have, once it decides to update, we'll have that going on. So we have remember the skylight in general is an environment light. What does it look like? Well, it has this kind of blue to yellow thing going on here, which you can see here in the color ramp, using the so-called realistic, trying to emulate like, an Earth atmosphere. And we have our sunlight kind of coming in from the upper right. Cool. Later on, we're going to add a volume light to approximate the fire scattering into the smoke. But for now, that should be sufficient. Great.